Good morning. If I haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet, my name is Jon, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of pastoring our Cheney campus. If you don't know or you're not familiar, Summit is one church in 3 locations. And so my family and I have lived in Cheney for a number of years, and about 3 months ago, we started our first services out there. And I want to just tell you that, number one, it's going really well. It's a lot of hard work. We set up and we tear down at Cheney High School every single week. I drive this gigantic 26-foot U-Haul. I pick it up at 6 in the morning, we drive it, we unload it, and we have an incredible opportunity to serve our community there. And in fact, my good friend Shane Austin and his team, they actually planted a church called Cheney Real Life at the middle school. They're about a half a block from us. And it's been really fun to journey with him together in that. God has really provided like a brother for me to go through this with. And between the 2 churches, in just the 8 to 10 weeks that we've been operating, we have over 400 people coming to new churches in Cheney, which is just a huge blessing for a small town. And the cool thing for me is that it's not just what we call transfer growth. So I have conversations with people every week, and it's not just, oh yeah, I used to go to this church, but now I'm trying yours out because you're new and cool and handsome. Well, nobody ever says that, But what I'm finding is people saying, yeah, I haven't been to church in 10 years. I haven't been to church in 15 years. I've never been to church. And every week without fail, somebody will say to me something to the effect of, we're so thankful that you're in Cheney. And I say that as the ushers have come forward and taken offering, I say that because you're a part of that. We are one church in 3 locations. All the money goes to one place, and then it's divvied out to do the work that God's called us to do. And so when you give to Summit, you're actually giving to the work that we're doing in Cheney. And so I just want to tell you that I really appreciate that. So thank you so much. We're having a great time. Pastor Grant is actually out there today, and he's really excited because he only has to preach 1 sermon today, and I have to preach 5. I told him if he's not careful, he might get the church planting bug after today because he'll know that he only has to do 1 service from here on out. Hey, I hope that your Thanksgiving was well. We had a good Thanksgiving with my family. We have this tradition every year where I have 3 kids. My brother has 4 kids. My brother and I, our parents take us to this place called Triple Play over in Idaho, this water park and stuff. And so every Friday, Saturday, the day after Thanksgiving, we go and do that. And on our way this year, I ran into a couple of problems. The first was that I dropped some stuff off at the post office. And as I was getting back into my car there in Cheney, I drive I call it a well-loved car, but it's a hand-me-down from my grandma and it has 300,000 miles on it, and it makes lots of noises. But in this case, it made a really loud noise when I went to turn the wheel. And I got out, and what I saw was that 3 of my wheels were pointed one way, and the other one was pointed this way. And I thought, that's probably not good. And so I got under there, and I looked at I'm not a mechanic by any stretch, but I looked under some things, and I saw that this thing had broken off called this tie rod, and I couldn't go anywhere. And so immediately, right, I'm not thankful on the day after Thanksgiving, and all I see are dollar signs, because that's how I operate in life. I'm like, how much is this going to cost me, whether it's my children or college or whatever, my cars. And so thankfully we got it fixed, and my dad told me, he said, man, son, you're lucky that didn't happen to you on the freeway. And that didn't even cross my mind, right? You guys are all like, yeah, no, duh, you moron. But I was like, being ungrateful, and then that happened. And then the same day, like, the heat in our house stopped working, which is really awesome. And so we were going away for the weekend, and we thought, well, we'll come back and we'll see what's happened. And so we got back yesterday, and our house was 49 degrees. Yeah, it was awesome. And so then I called, the after hours guy, which is always like, $8 million. And of course, I'm just thinking, like, how much is it going to cost me? And so he comes down to my basement, and he's checking things out for about like a half an hour. And he finally calls me down. He's like, hey, can I talk to you? I'm like, yes, you can talk to me. You're in my house and you're fixing my stuff. And so I go down there, and he starts explaining stuff to me. And of course, he uses language that I don't understand. Like, I am at the mercy of anybody fixing anything in my house. Like, I just believe that they will have what's coming to them by the Lord one day if they rip me off. That's how I operate in life, because that's all that I can do. And so he starts talking to me about like ohms, and my ohms aren't working. I thought ohms were like when you meditate, like ohm. I don't know what an ohm is. And he's just going on, and finally, this is what I'm thinking, like, get to the point, dude. Like, what's the damage going to be? And this is what he says to me. He goes, I got to be honest with you. One of the first things I did right when I got down here was I shut down your entire system. He says, I've been doing this for a long time, and this was the most dangerous situation I've ever been in. The meter that was like hooked up to your gas, it wasn't working, and so it's been dumping gas into your house, and at any time, your house could have exploded. And I'm like, that's not what you want to hear from a tech. At the same time, right, I'm thinking, oh, Lord, another bill, right? And I'm thinking, no, God actually, like, protected my family. So the Lord taught me a little bit something about thankfulness this week and about being thankful in the midst of circumstances. The sad part for my children is they're going to get a furnace for Christmas. I'm trying to figure out how to break the news to them. It's like, the good news is you don't get a lump of coal. The bad news is you get natural gas. And Daddy got a new tire on his car. So Anyway, something about Thanksgiving in there somewhere. Hey, today we're going to be spending most of our time in John chapter 8. We're going to continue our series in the Gospel of John that we've been doing. But before we do that, we're going to spend a little bit of time in the Old Testament. And I'll just say this. I love movies. And one of my favorite types of movies, probably my favorite genre, is what I call like thrillers or movies that have really surprise twists and turns and plots. Like, I love that. And so I'm not going to recommend these movies because they are R-rated and you are good Christian people. But two of my favorite ones, the one of them is called The Usual Suspects. This is a movie that came out like in the 90s and just has this incredible, shocking twist turn at the end. And then another one that I watched that I really liked was called Inception. It just totally messes with my mind. And the thing that I like about these is that the more that you watch them, the more you pick up every time. So in other words, you watch it the first time, you're trying to make sense of it. Then you go back and watch it again, you pick up little clues, and you're like, oh, that makes sense now for the ending. And in many ways, to me, the Old Testament is like that. Sometimes the Old Testament can seem scary and weird and strange, and it doesn't always make sense. But the more that you read it, and then the more that you read the New Testament actually makes sense in light of what you read in the Old Testament. And I would argue this, that today in John chapter 8, that if we don't read this first part in Exodus, we're going to miss the entire part. If we don't know this story in the Old Testament, we're going to miss the entire thing. So we're going to be in Exodus chapter 3, and I want to give you a little bit of a running start. If you are familiar or you forgot or you don't know, the primary sort of person in the book of Exodus is Moses. And at the end of Genesis, things are going really well. The Israelite people are flourishing in the land of Egypt. There was this guy named Joseph. In fact, the very end of Genesis 50, there's this verse where Joseph says to his brothers, what you intended for harm, God intended for my good, which is exactly the song that we just sang. And so the people prosper in the land for 400 years, and then you fast forward 400 years to the book of Exodus, and the Israelites are there, and they're growing in number, and the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gets really concerned about this. And so he issues a really harsh edict. What he says is that all the new Hebrew baby boys that are born are to be killed. And so there's this really godly woman, and she doesn't want her son to be killed, and so she gives birth, and then she puts him in a basket, names him Moses, or actually I think she sends him down the river, and then who would pick him up but Pharaoh's daughter, and she names him Moses because she drew him out of the water, it says. And so she picks up this basket, and there's a boy in there. And her father is the one who has ordered that all the babies be killed, but she's a daddy's girl, and daddy's girls get what they want. And so she says, can I raise this son? And he says, you can raise. It doesn't say that, but I'm inferring either she hid the baby for a long time or she just raised him. And so Moses is a Hebrew boy. He's an Israelite boy, but he grows up in Pharaoh's household. So he is raised as an Egyptian. When he is an adult, he goes out one day and he sees one of these Egyptian slave masters beating one of his Israelite brothers. And so he goes out, he tries to stop it, and he ends up killing the Egyptian. So he's a murderer. Moses is a murderer. He thinks that nobody sees him, and then the next day he goes out and he sees two of his own people, two Israelites fighting each other. So he tries to go and make peace, and the one guy says to him, what are you going to do, kill us like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? And Moses is like, oh, snap. That's what the Bible says in the Hebrew, oh, snap. And so he heads for the hills. He goes to the forest, to the wilderness. And it's kind of like a crazy story, but he meets these 7 daughters at this well. He helps one of them out. The dad gets really excited because that means he can get rid of one of his kids and get her married off. And so Moses marries one of these ladies. And Moses is a murderer on the run living in the wilderness. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace as the king's son. Now he's a murderer living in the wilderness. And when he's 80 years old, when he should be retired and traveling the sands of Egypt in an RV collecting seashells, God calls him out. And he calls him into some greater purpose for his life. And Exodus chapter 3, verse 1 says this. Now Moses was keeping the flock with his father Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. So there's a bush that's on fire. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it wasn't consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. I'm going to go check this out, he says, why the bush is burning, why it's burning but not burned. When the Lord saw that, he turned aside to see. God called to him out of the bush, and he said, Moses, Moses. Moses said, here I am. He said, don't come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. This is a holy moment. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I've heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. And I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. I've heard them. I've also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, and I'm going to send you to Pharaoh that you might bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, well, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And God said, I'll be with you, and this will be a sign for you that I have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. You're going to come back here and you're going to worship me. Verse 13, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? It's a very strange question. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. So here we have this scene. Moses is 80 years old. He's walking in the wilderness. He sees this bush that's on fire, but it's not being consumed. It's not smoking. It's not burning up. And like all of us here, we would say, that's an interesting sight. I'm going to go check it out. So he checks it out. God says, hold up. This is a holy moment. Take off your sandals. And God speaks to him out of this bush. And God tells him, Moses, you're going to be the one that's going to go release my people. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh, and you're going to ask Pharaoh to release my people, and they're going to come back to this mountain and worship me. Moses says, who am I to do that? I'm not the guy. I'm a murderer on the run, man. I'm not the guy. God says, I'm going to be with you. And so Moses says, okay, suppose I do that. Suppose I do that, and I come back to my people, and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me. They're going to ask me, what is his name? If they ask me what your name is, God, what should I tell them? That is a strange question. What do you mean, what is your name? Does God have a name? Well, listen. Moses grew up in a whole different world than you and I did. He grew up in a polytheistic world. He grew up in the household of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians had hundreds of gods. And all of those gods had different attributes. You had big gods like the god of the sun and the god of the underworld. You had small gods like the gods of the crops and the gods of the crickets. You had all kinds of gods, and the people knew what they had to do to get an end result with a god. So they worshiped lots of gods. There was lots of temples. So if I needed to go to the god of fertility, I might go to the temple of fertility. I might have to sleep with the priest there in hopes that the god of fertility, who's distant and far away, would answer me. If I want help with my crops, I might go to the god of the crops. There's lots of gods, and they all have names, and their names say something about them. Their names indicate who they are: the god of the sun, the god of the moon, the god of the crops. You see what I'm saying? This is the world that the Israelites also lived in. In fact, the Israelites had been in that city, in that country for 400 years. There's a very good chance that they had assimilated into the culture. We don't know if they worshiped the Egyptian gods, but we certainly don't know how well they were following the God of their fathers. So Moses asks a question that actually makes sense in that context. What he says to God is, they're going to ask me who you are. Which God are you? What name should I tell them? Moses wants to know, are you a big God or are you a small God? And God says to him, you want my name? I am that I am. I am who I am. You tell the people that I am sent me to you. What the heck does that mean? I am, right? What does that mean? Well, it's a verb to be. That's really what it means. It's the verb to be. And smart people tell me that in the Hebrew, there's no tenses. So there's not past tense, present tense, future tense. And so really, there's some mystery around this name. Really what it could mean is I was who I was, or I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. There's mystery around this. It's like, imagine this. Imagine that there was a cosmic wrestling match. And you were at this cosmic wrestling fight, and the announcer was introducing the gods. And he would say, like, in this corner, here we have the champion, the God of the underworld, the God of the resurrection and the life, the God of fertility. You know him because he dresses like a mummy and his skin is green. Would you welcome Osiris? And in this corner, he is. That's what this means. It's very strange. He just is. But I think in his very name, God is trying to tell us a lot about who he is and trying to tell Moses about who he is. So here's kind of 5 quick things that I think God is conveying in the very name that he is. The name is actually Yahweh. It's the letters YHWH, and we believe it was pronounced Yahweh. They didn't have vowels in Hebrew, so it's only consonants, but it's Yahweh. And so anytime you read your Bible and it says the Lord God in capital letters, it's actually this word, Yahweh. So the first thing I think his name conveys to us is that he is eternal. He is eternal. You see, in that culture, gods died. There were gods that were mortal. They lived, they died, they treated each other poorly. Ones would rise up over other ones, kill other ones off. They died. God's very name, I am who I am, I was who I was, I will be who I will be, it says to us he's eternal, right? There's no spectrum for God. There's no timeline for God. He has always existed, unlike the other gods that come and go and die. The second thing that's similar to this first one is that he is self-existent. This God, Yahweh, doesn't rely on anybody for his existence. He wasn't created by anyone. All the other gods came from some other god. They were created through rape and murder and all these weird situations. They came into being. This God has always existed. He doesn't rely on anybody else for his existence. If the world ceased to exist, this God would still exist. The third one is that he is mysterious or not to be manipulated. You see, with the other gods, the people kind of knew what they needed to do. It's sort of like these cosmic slot machines, right? If I need this from that god, I do this type of worship, and I get what I get from God. The God of the Bible, Yahweh, if you read the Old Testament, here's what you're going to find. God doesn't always act one way in one situation and the same way in another situation. He's mysterious. This God demands relationship. He's not somebody that we can figure out and solve and say, I know God exactly for who he is every single time. There's mystery around this God. The other gods you kind of could figure out. The fourth one is that this God, Yahweh, is sovereign. He is supreme over all the other gods. You don't see this in this specific passage, although you'll see it in the 10 plagues. You're going to see it when God starts doing the 10 plagues and Pharaoh's going to his gods and his sorcerers, and none of them can match what this God is doing. When you read the whole Old Testament, what you get very clearly is this idea that, now you and I know that there's not actually other gods, but in the Bible, it portrays it as like these other little gods are at God's feet. Like he's like, get up off me. Like you're annoying. Like these gods aren't even worthy to be by his footstool, is what the Bible says. There are no other gods. But if these gods did exist, this God, Yahweh, is supreme over all. There is no cosmic wrestling match because nobody can match him. And the last one, which I think is very clear in this passage, is this idea, is that this God, Yahweh, is present with his people. Remember what God said to Moses? Moses said, I'm not the guy, I can't do this. God said, I'm going to be with you. That his very name, to be, indicates that I'm going to be with you. You say, why does any of this matter? You're going to have to hold on to that until the very end. So sit tight with that. But keep in mind this idea of I am. That's how God revealed himself to Moses. Okay, in John chapter 9, I want to give you a little bit of or John chapter 8, I want to give you a little bit of a forecast of what we're going to talk about. We're going to spend a little bit of time, in fact, most of our time at the first couple verses, the first section, and then we're going to cruise through the middle section, and then we're going to spend some time at the end. And so just a tiny bit of context is that if you were here last week, there was this story of the woman caught in adultery, and then Jesus is doing some teaching. He's talking about light and dark. And so we're in the middle of one of Jesus' major dialogues. So he's teaching the people. He's saying all kinds of things. And we're going to start in verse 31, but right before that, it's going to say that many people believed in Jesus. So lots of people were putting their faith in him. And so John chapter 8, verse 31 says this. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And they answered him, well, we are offspring of Abraham, and we've never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? And Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave doesn't remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my word finds no place in you. And so I want to talk about kind of that first verse for a minute. There's a lot there. Verse 31, it says, Jesus says, if you abide in my word, you are really my disciples. If you abide in my word, you're my true disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So keep in mind that he's talking to people that say they believe in Jesus. It says people put their faith in him. We're going to find out as we go on that their faith may not be genuine. And so when Jesus says, if you abide in my word, what is he talking about when he says my word? What does that mean? Well, really what he's talking about is the totality of his teaching so far. So Jesus has taught us a lot. If you've been with us in the Gospel of John, Jesus has taught us a lot about himself, who he is, his relationship to the Father. He's talked about going to the cross to pay for our sins. He's talked about believing in him to have eternal life. He's talked about teachings about how to treat other people. So Jesus, when he talks about abiding in my word, he's talking about the totality of who he is and his teaching. But I want to take a minute to look at this word abide. I think it's interesting. The word abide in the Greek, I'm not a scholar, but the word abide is translated a couple different ways in the New Testament. So the same word is translated a couple different ways depending on the context. And so some of the ways that it's translated are this. It can mean to remain, or to continue in, or to dwell in. So that's kind of the same idea. So if we substituted that, we might say this, that Jesus says, if you remain in my word, then you're really my disciples. If you continue in my word, we're going to find in John chapter 6, we saw a lot of people didn't continue in his word. They left him. If you continue in my word, then you're really my disciples. The one I want to focus on is the last one. If you dwell in my word, then you are really my disciples. I kind of like that. In fact, the word abide is related to this word abode. And sometimes we call our houses our abode, right? You ever go to somebody's house and they say, welcome to my humble abode? I think that's so strange. It's like I'm in Middle Earth and they're going to introduce me to Gandalf and Frodo or something like that. Like, they always say it with an accent. My abode, right? This is to abide. It's a dwelling place. It's a house. I like that. Jesus says, if you dwell in my word, if you live into my word, then you are really my disciples. I was picturing what this would look like for me. Like if I just imagine that everywhere I went, I was surrounded or covered in Jesus' words and his teaching in his life. If everywhere I went, like he was my dwelling place, how would that affect my marriages? Well, not my marriages, my marriage. that was awkward. Maybe I should say our marriages. How would that affect our marriages, our relationship with our kids, our coworkers? If I lived this idea that I lived under the teachings of Jesus, that if I lived in his life and death and resurrection and his word, if I dwelt in that, how would that impact my life? You know, this is probably not going to be something popular to say, but I'm going to say it. I believe that one of the major problems that we have in the church right now is that there are a lot of people that are not living in the teachings of Jesus. They're not abiding in him. They're not abiding in who he is. And anything that I mention here is only because God has worked these things out in my life as well. I want to make that clear. And he is working them out, and he's bringing them to my attention. But I think one of the most prominent areas that I've seen this in, particularly with young people, is the idea of sexual purity. The Bible is clear that any sexual activity outside of marriage, if you're not married, you're committing adultery. That's what the Bible says. And of course, Jesus takes that to another step, and he says if you even lust in your heart, you're committing adultery, and I understand that. But the teachings of Jesus is clear, that if we abide in his dwellings regarding sexual purity, then we are to abstain from that until the point in time that God has given us. And I'm going to sound like an old man here for a minute, and I don't want to do that, but it's become very difficult for me to find any young people that take that seriously. When I'm meeting with people for premarital counseling, it is the norm now for Christian kids who grow up in the church, that are serving in the church, that claim to be true disciples of Jesus, to not abstain from sexual activity until they're married. It's become the norm. And Jesus says, you want to be my true disciple in regards to your sexuality, you got to live in my teachings. And that's not just for young people, that's for old people, that's for everybody, married, young, single, that God has a standard for our sexuality, that we are to give that to him and to honor him. And I don't see that a lot in our culture today. The second one that I would say is money. And I know we talked about this and Pastor Grant talked about it last week. I just want to say this. If we're spending more money on coffee every month than we are giving to people, that's a disconnect between the teachings of Jesus. I'm not even just talking about giving here. Don't hear me. I'm talking about just being generous in general to people. This is a hard one for me. I spend frivolously on things. And I'm not saying this to bring the hammer down, because I'm bringing it on myself. There are things that I don't need. There are things I need, like a furnace and heat, so my toilet seat isn't cold. But there are other things. That was a lesson that my kids are learning some lessons. Like last night, they're like, Dad, the toilet seat was cold. I'm like, I know. Welcome to how I lived in college. There's things that I need, but I buy a lot of stuff I don't need. right? I don't know that I always live into Jesus' teachings with my finances. The last one is with my time. This is the hardest one for me. Like, I study a lot, I prepare, I read God's word as a pastor. But man, that time alone with Jesus, meditating, being in his word, aside from the message I have to teach, that time is few and far between. I've got kids, my wife works, we've got sports activities, we've got life. Often that's the first thing to go. Jesus says, you got to abide in me. In John chapter 15, he's going to say, I'm the vine and you're the branches. You got to stay connected to me. And I just find that as a whole, that we sometimes are quick to like be Jesus' disciples in some areas and then just completely disregard them in others. And Jesus says here, like, I'm not going to mix words. He says, if you abide in my word, you're actually really my disciple. If you actually do what I say, you're my disciple. Jesus says in Luke chapter 6, why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? That's probably like the strongest indictment on my life every moment of every day. Probably 100 times a day, Jesus could look at me and say, why do you call me Lord and not actually do what I tell you to do? And he's right. He's right. I honor him with my lips, but my heart is far from him in so many of these areas. So Jesus says, you want to be my true disciple, you've got to live into this. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about, okay, are you talking about works-based stuff? Well, yeah, kind of. Jesus says you do have to like do some stuff. Like you have to follow his teaching, but it's birthed out of something else that we're going to talk about at the end. Jesus says this. He says that if you do this, that you'll have the truth, and the truth will set you free. And so the people misunderstand him, and they answer him like, what do you mean? We don't need to be free. We're not slaves to anyone. We're Abraham's children. This is really ironic. This is ironic because like the whole history of the Israelites is they've been slaves to lots of people. We just talked about it in Exodus. They were slaves to the Egyptians. They were slaves to the Assyrians, to the Babylonians. At this very moment, at this time, they're not necessarily slaves to the Romans, but they are under the reign and the rule of the Roman people. They want political freedom. And so it's strange to me that the people say, we haven't been slaves to anyone. And then they appeal to their father Abraham, which they're going to do a couple times here. And really, I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but what they're doing is they're appealing to their spiritual heritage. Like, Jesus is going to give them some pretty significant spiritual truth here, and they're just going to keep going back to, but Abraham's our father. Abraham's our father. We know this stuff. We know God. Abraham's our father. This reminds me of people that say, like, my granddaddy was a Presbyterian pastor, and so I know that I followed Jesus, right? They don't usually use that accent. I don't know why I did that, but there are people that they like appeal to their spiritual heritage. My grandpa was a pastor. My dad was a pastor. I was confirmed, Lutheran or confirmed this when I was this age. I'm like, your life bears no reflection that you know who Jesus is. It bears no reflection that you know who Jesus is by the way that you live. But your grandpa was a pastor, right? This is what they're doing. This is what they're saying. Our grandpa was a pastor, so we know God. Jesus is like, you don't know God. And he's going to go into more specifically. Jesus says in verse 34 that truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. That's a word right there. Jesus says, if you commit sin, who commits sin? Everyone. Jesus says, apart from him, you're a slave to sin. What does a slave do? A slave obeys his or her master, right? Everything that the master says that you do, you've got to do. And Jesus says that when you are apart from him, when you're not abiding in him, you are a slave to your master, and your master is sin. And some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you have lived this at times. Some of you are living it right now where you feel like you're a slave to sin. That you've got these things in your life that you can't break free from. And Jesus says, apart from me, you'll never break free from them. We are all about freedom in this culture. We are all about freedom. Jesus says the truth will set you free, and we say, amen, I'm all about freedom. But this is the message of freedom that the world gives us today. The world says that freedom is this: do whatever you want with whoever you want as often as you want, and don't let anyone tell you what to do or put restrictions on you. That's freedom. Nothing is off limits. That's what the world says right now. But the ironic thing is that worldly freedom only leads to bondage. That type of freedom only leads to bondage. And we know the statistics. We know that it's true. We are wealthier than we've ever been. We are more sexually liberated than we've ever been. And we are more miserable as human beings in America than we've ever been. All the statistics show it. We are more depressed, more anxious. We have more lonely. We have more relationship problems, more financial problems than we've ever had, because worldly freedom leads to actual enslavement. And I'm not saying this as like a Fox News right-wing politician anchor, like the world is going to hell in a handbasket. I'm saying this to you as a pastor who cares about your soul. Worldly freedom doesn't lead us to true freedom. I read this article this past week from this lady. She wrote an op-ed piece for the not the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and it was all about how she had left her faith and she was an atheist, and sort of like, how does she be an atheist during the Thanksgiving season? That was what it was about. And it was really interesting. I mean, she talked about like how she doesn't like it when people use the word blessed because there's no God who actually blesses you. She talked about how like living in her house, like they have to, her parents pray at Thanksgiving, and so she doesn't pray with them. And it was like a really interesting article. But what she said was sort of striking. Ultimately, what she was saying was, ever since I got rid of God, I'm really free now. Like I'm free to be who I want to be. And that's the message we preach today. The world preaches, just be who you want to be. Jesus says, no. True freedom comes from me. True freedom is found in Jesus and only in Jesus. Now, some of you might be saying like, well, if that's true, if freedom is found in Jesus, then why am I still a slave to sin sometimes, right? I think that's a real question. That's an honest question. That's something that I struggle with. And a pastor said something that helped me out one time. Here's what he said. He said, imagine it's like this. Imagine you work for a ruthless boss. So your boss is a ruthless guy, and you've worked for him your whole life, your whole career. Every time that phone rings, you've got to go to the office. You have to do whatever your boss says whenever he says it. And all you're waiting for is you're looking towards retirement where you don't have to listen to your boss anymore. And so you put in your 30 years, and on the first day of your retirement, at 6 in the morning, the phone rings, you look over, and it's your old boss. And what's your immediate response to do? Pick up the phone. What do you need, boss? This is what he said it's like. When you become a Christian, when you've been enslaved to sin for 30 years, sin has been your boss for 30 years. You're used to talking to sin and answering to sin, and it takes time. We call that, in the theological world, we call it sanctification. There's a process that Jesus has to take me through, that he moves me on to say, I don't have to listen to the voice of my old boss anymore. I'm now free, but sometimes it's hard to walk in that freedom, isn't it? Jesus says, if you want to be free, I can provide it for you. We've got to go really fast. Here we go. Verse 39. Only like 74 more verses to go in 10 minutes. They answered him, Abraham is our father, Jesus said to them. Actually, 38. I'll start at 38. I speak of what I've seen with my father, and you do what you've heard from your father. And they answered him, well, Abraham is our father. My daddy is a pastor. Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works that Abraham did. But now that you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God, this is not what Abraham did. Abraham didn't try to kill God. You are doing the works that your father did. They said to him, we were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God. A lot of people think this is a little shot at Jesus here about his birth, that he's illegitimate, right? We're not illegitimate like you, Jesus. God is our Father. Verse 42, Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God and I'm here. I cannot of my own accord, but he sent me. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It's because you can't bear to hear my word. Jesus should get credit for the phrase, you can't handle the truth. That's what he says. You can't handle the truth. Just like that, Academy Award. You are of your father, the devil. You get just think about it for a second. Like, hey, by the way, your dad is Satan. Cool, right? This is like, Jesus is getting pretty intense here. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do his desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he has nothing to do with truth, because there's no truth in him at all. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, or he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you don't believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? What have I done wrong? If I tell you the truth, why don't you believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason why you don't hear them is that you are not of God. So the conversation is sort of escalating a little bit. You can kind of see that. And remember how this passage started out? It started out with those who had put their faith in him. So the Bible says these are the people that have put their faith in him. Jesus is having this dialogue, and what we're seeing is they're kind of like that parable of the rocky soil where the word has come in, but it hasn't really taken root, right? Because what we're finding is they actually didn't really believe in him. They are his enemies. And it starts to escalate. And I'm not there. You weren't there. I don't know like the demeanor, the language. I wasn't there to like hear how this conversation's going. But what I can say for pretty certain is it's getting pretty serious pretty fast, right? They just keep saying, Abraham's our dad, Abraham's our father, he's our forefather, and Jesus is like, actually, your father is the devil. That's going to make some people angry, right? And so he goes on to say, like, that the devil's a liar. We say that in the church sometimes. The devil is a liar. This is where this comes from right now. You can claim that. The devil, you are a liar. And I wish I had more time to go into this because I don't know exactly how it all works. I don't know how it all works. I don't know, like, I don't even want to go into it right now because I'll do it injustice. But here's what I'll say. The Bible is clear, and Jesus Christ himself is clear that we have an enemy. We have an adversary, and that the language he speaks is lies. That he's a murderer from the beginning, that he incited Cain to kill Abel, that he's a deceiver from the beginning because he tempted Adam and Eve, that he's a deceiver, a liar. His number one goal is to seek and to kill and destroy, as we're going to read in John chapter 10, and his desire is not for my good, it's for my harm. And he whispers lies. And Jesus says, anything apart from me, anything apart from abiding in me is living a lie. It's living a false narrative. Well, they're not very happy, so in verse 48, they say this. The Jews answered him, aren't we right in saying that you're a Samaritan and you have a demon? Hey, Jesus, would it be correct to say that you're a half-breed and you're demon-possessed? Like, would we be all right with that? Jesus answered, no, I don't have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I don't seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. He said, you abide in me, you'll never see death. The Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. You are crazy. What do you mean you won't taste death? Abraham died, as did the prophets, yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham who died, and the prophets who died? Who do you make yourself out to be? Who do you think that you are? Jesus said, you believe in me, you abide in me, you keep my teachings, you keep my word, you'll never taste death. What are you talking about, Jesus? Abraham died, Moses died, Isaiah died, Jeremiah died, David died. They all died. Who do you think that you are? That's what they say to him. Verse 54, Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It's the Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. But you don't know him. I know him. Jesus said, you think you know God. You don't know him. I know him. If I were to say that I don't know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, you're not even 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham? So Jesus says, I know Abraham. Your father, you keep reference, I know him. And he actually... We've talked about it, and he actually looked forward to my day, and he's seeing it now. There's something in that language there that is indicating that Jesus knows Abraham, and so that's why they respond to him and say, you're not even 50 years old, and you're telling us you've seen Abraham? You're crazy. Here's what Jesus says. Verse 58. Jesus said to them, I'm going to tell you the truth. Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. You see what Jesus says? Who do you think you are? And Jesus' response to the people is this, I am. This is the most explicit claim to deity, I believe, in the life of Jesus. Jesus says to the people, they know who I am is. They know there is only one I am, the great I am. And Jesus Christ says, I know Abraham because I hang out with him and I am. And what is their response to him? They pick up rocks to kill him. This is blasphemy. There's only one I am, Jesus, and you are not him. Sometimes people will say to me, they'll say that Jesus never claimed to be God. He never claimed that. We put that on him. He's a good teacher who taught really good things. You could take him to John chapter 8. The words literally, I am, are the exact same words in the Old Testament translated in the Greek. This is an explicit claim to deity. Do you remember how we talked earlier at the beginning about kind of the 5 things, there's lots more, but that the name I am means about God, that he's self-existent, that he's eternal, that he's mysterious, that he's sovereign, supreme, that he's with us. All of those things you will find as you read the New Testament are said about Jesus as well. All of those things are borne out in the life of Jesus. He is eternal. We saw that in John chapter 1. He is self-existent. John chapter 1. He is mysterious. We can't solve Jesus. We have to have a relationship with Jesus where we engage with him, where he takes us on a life journey with him. We don't just get to say, oh, I've got Jesus figured out and so I don't need him anymore. We journey with him. But I love the last one. Remember we talked about how God was present with Moses? God was present with his people? It's Christmas time. We're going to start singing songs and we're going to start talking about Emmanuel. You guys know what the word Emmanuel means? God with us. God with us. We're going to celebrate God being with us because Jesus in the flesh is literally God with us. God has come to his people. He is with his people and they don't even recognize him. And I'm telling you, that's a word for some people here, that God is with you. He is making himself known to you, and you don't recognize who he is. Ultimately, what this does, if we're honest with ourselves, is this takes us to a position, right, where either Jesus is telling the truth or he's lying. It can't be both. It can't be in the middle. Either Jesus is actually the I am, that he is God with us in the flesh, or he's not, and he's a liar, and he's crazy, or any one of those beliefs. But whichever one that you land on, that's going to dictate the rest of your life. Remember how we talked about these sort of works, or these doing the right things, living into his teaching? Like, we don't believe as Christians that like what we do is what makes us righteous. We know that it's our belief in who Jesus is and the work that he's done. But if I hold that Jesus is God in the flesh, if I hold that to be true, that has a great bearing on the rest of my life, doesn't it? It means everything. Every single part of my life has to conform to who he is, right? Or it should be working towards that. I mentioned early in the sermon about the kind of this lady who wrote this article, and I want to close with this. I want to read the end of it. She's talking about like how to give thanks apart from God and how her life is so much better without God. And here's what she says at the end of the article. She says, "I sometimes mourn not being a part of the big Christian community in this country. It usually feels like I'm in the minority rather than the majority. But then I remember that now I'm a part of a bigger community, the human community, the earth-dwelling community. Since I've cut God out of my life, I have so much more room for everyone else. I turn onto she's at like a monastery. She says, I turn onto a gravel path that takes me to a valley. In that valley, a labyrinth has been carved out in the tall grasses. It's the perfect autumn afternoon to meander through the maze. As I walk, crispy stalks of hay sway in the breeze, brushing my hands and cheeks. I collect dried leaves on the toe of my shoe, and I kick them so I can hear them rustle. I feel my cheeks glowing with redness from the nipping air, so I stop and turn my face to the sun. I raise my face to the sun, I close my eyes, and I let the sun's rays thaw my chilled cheeks. Then I continue on, a smile across my face. When I reach the clearing end at the labyrinth's end, I find a bouquet of dried flowers tied together with twine resting on a rock, an altar. I feel compelled to kneel before it, to wrap my hands together, to give thanks for this splendid day of perfect beauty, for being allowed to observe it and appreciate it. I do fall to my knees, but instead of folding my hands, I plant them on the earth, and then I allow my forehead to follow. I hug the ground, and instead of sending my prayers up to heaven, I whisper them into the grass." Sometimes in the Christian faith we say this, we say that we are made to worship. Everybody is worshiping something. And this lady, and my heart goes out to her, this lady who says, I don't want to worship God, has chosen to worship the created thing rather than the creator. Isn't that sad? She's worshiping, rather than the one who makes the thing, she's worshiping the earth because that's where she wants to find her life. My life is found in Jesus Christ. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, I thank you for this word, Lord. I know that some of it seems harsh, but it's your word, Lord, and it's your truth. And I pray for freedom, Lord. Your word says that if you set us free, that we are free indeed, Lord. I pray for freedom from sin, from bondage to sin, Lord. I pray that we wouldn't answer to our old taskmaster, that we wouldn't be slaves to sin, Lord, but we would be slaves to you, and that we would find our freedom in you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand with me? May you be men and women who believe and embrace that Jesus is God with us, and may you be his true disciples in every area of your life. Have a great day.